What's going on, guys? I'm Tyler, and in continuing my series of Disney movie reviews, I'm here to let you know that Fantasia 2000 is no perfect movie. And it basically follows the exact same structure as the original. There are 7 shorts here that are set to classical music, 6 of them are brand new, one of them is the Sorcerer's Apprentice from the original. And the main differences are the shorts have different drawing styles of animation, shorter and different genres of music, and a celebrity host for each segment, which we'll get to later. But it was always a goal for Walt Disney to turn Fantasia into a franchise. Have it re released every few years, have older shorts mixed with new ones, give audiences a fresh new interpretation every time they see it. I really wish we got a franchise, but it only took until the early 90s when Walt Disney's nephew, Roy, who was vice chairman at that point, finally got his wishes and finally got a sequel, which ended up being released 9 years later. And people liked it when it came out, but they felt like it was inferior to the original. But I'm probably in the minority when I say this, but I actually did get a little bit more enjoyment out of this one. In fact, the nicest thing I can say is that comparing these shorts to each other, it was really hard to pick a favorite. Like The Pines of Rome, which follows a pod of whales who come across a supernova. And the supernova allows them to levitate above the ocean, which sounds really cool, and it absolutely is. I will say that the CG on the whales looks a little dated in terms of texture, and sometimes their expressions are a little too human, but it doesn't really change the fact that the music and the story feel equally hand in hand together. It leads to some fantastic visuals, especially the finale where the pod of whales breach the sky and start breaching the clouds instead of waves, which all looked really fantastic. It looked magical. It looked out of this world, and I was smiling by the very end of it, and that's the best compliment I can give to any of these shorts. Rhapsody in Blue was always my favorite Fantasia short out of either one of them as a kid. I love the drawing style where every character in every setting has its own different color, kind of like an Al Hirschfeld drawing out of a New York Times cartoon or a New Yorker magazine, which fits the setting of Depression era New York very nicely. The George Gershwin music was a nice shift from strictly orchestral to orchestral mixed with jazz. The music itself gives the characters this feeling of sadness but also hope at the exact same time, because the characters themselves are probably the strongest thing about this short. Their storylines are woven together so nicely. They never realize that they interact off of each other, which I thought was really funny. And each of them all have simple but huge needs and desires in their life. One of them wants a dream job. One of them wants any job given the climate. One of them wants recognition from their parents because they spend so little time with them. Those are really easy motivations for us to identify with, and they're motivations that fit so well with visual storytelling. This entire short is a great example of how visual storytelling can be so much better than dialogue. You don't need to hear someone's complaints, you just need to see them live their lives. And as long as their expressions and their comedic timing are on point, as they are in this short, you can get the point across to just about anyone. I'm probably going to lose some people when I say that I enjoyed Carnival of the Animals, where there's a flamingo with a yo-yo. It does sound incredibly stupid, but hear me out on this. The storyline centers around his entire flock, who are all incredibly dull and pretentious and follow the exact same routine every day. And they try to force him against his will to follow that routine, and he'll have absolutely none of it. He'd rather live a life that is playful and cheerful as a life that's incredibly strict and stern. And for me personally, it felt like an analogy about classical music. Everyone associates it with being strictly by the book, completely dark, serious, grand, and epic. But you have Carnival of the Animals, which is a lot more faster and upbeat. So in terms of that analogy, and in terms of the slapstick that goes along with the music, which is incredibly well timed, I liked it. I chuckled. I smiled. And that's all I want from a Disney movie. The Steadfast Tin Soldier might actually be the darkest story in this one, especially with the way it's aged 20 years later, but I still think it's a really good short. The music is much more fast-paced and dramatic than most other shorts, but it also has its cheerful and uplifting moments. I like the fact that the main character is a one-legged toy. You don't see that many physically disabled characters be able to prove themselves physically. The Jack in the Box I thought was creepy enough in an over the top way to be an intimidating villain. I like that the ballerina doesn't give two shits if he has one arm. All she cares about is if he has a compassionate personality, and he absolutely does. He's brave, he's selfless. She herself is pretty brave and selfless. She doesn't bow down to anybody. She's basically like Jasmine. She's not a damsel because she's useless. She's a damsel because she fights back. It's the only reason she gets herself in any trouble. There is a happy ending as opposed to the way the original story went, but the original story had a lot of plot conveniences for me personally that ended up that way, so I felt like the happy ending in this one felt a little more earned story wise. Pomp and Circumstance, where Donald is essentially leading Noah's Ark and the animals along with it, does two things unique. One of them is portray Donald Duck in his misery in complete silence. One of the funniest things about Donald Duck has always been his voice, especially when he screams and yells at everything. But this short proves that you can treat him as a silent character and you can still laugh at the slapstick. The visuals are all large scale, especially considering he's leading Noah's Ark, and it leads to some kooky slapstick moments. But the other unique thing that this short does is actually make me feel the connection between Donald and Daisy, which never happens for me. And the story centering around them in particular is pretty forced, if I'm being completely honest, but seeing the two of them alone without each other, their expressions make them so sad, and you actually kind of feel how important they are to each other. And because these characters never get a happy ending, it's really nice to see them have one. It's a refreshing change of pace, and it actually makes me like Daisy Duck. How often can you really say that? And even though it was hard to pick a favorite short, mine personally was the finale with the Firebird Suite. The drawing style felt like an homage to Miyazaki and Princess Mononoke, because just look at the elk. It's the exact same elk. Plus, her face has the exact same features of an anime character. The eyes, the nose, the mouth, the smile. Just how devoted the sprite is to nature is an obvious reference to Studio Ghibli there. The Phoenix itself was a surprisingly creative villain. I really knew nothing about the music or Igor Stravinsky before this short, but I love how it's the short that really captures the original themes of the first Fantasia about how beautiful nature can be, about how even when a tree dies, another one grows back and takes its place. It's a very realistic but optimistic look at nature that I really appreciate. Now, the one thing that everyone can agree that's inferior to the original, myself included, are the celebrity appearances in this movie. In their defense, they're only a minute long, and not all of them are that bad. I like the ones that Quincy Jones, James Earl Jones, and Angela Lansbury did, where they didn't feel like they were reading off of a teleprompter or cue cards. They felt like they were just being themselves. Even when James Earl Jones makes a joke, he does it with a straight face. He doesn't do any exaggerated expressions. He doesn't give the wah wah look like the majority of them do, because every other celebrity that gives an introduction just feels like they're phoning it in. Steve Martin's trying to be his stand-up personality, which doesn't match up. Bette Midler, for some reason, thinks adults don't know who Salvador Dali is, and she sucks at coming up with jokes just by herself. And Penn Teller, who I'm a big fan of Penn Teller. I really like these guys, but they have a very blunt and cynical look about life and escapism that doesn't really match up with how optimistic most Disney works are. So I don't really understand the logic of having them introduce Sorcerer's Apprentice. You could have gotten David Copperfield or Lance Burton, people who really have an optimistic look on life and magic. And the weirdest thing is, even though these shorts are mostly geared towards kids and adults alike, the introductions seem solely just for adults as opposed to kids, because kids would not understand any of the jokes that these guys were telling. I never understood the jokes. If anything, the only presenter that I remembered as a kid was Quincy Jones, because he was so serious. He felt like your favorite teacher. He treated you seriously. He acted like himself. He had a lot of respect for the musicians, which he clearly showed when he gave an introduction with the pianist. Why didn't they just have him introduce it? He's only in it for a minute. You could have him prepare other ones just on the fly. And the other problem with Fantasia 2000 that so many other people have pointed out, it is way too short. I understand that hand-drawn animation costs more than CG, and considering the budget that they came up with just to make 6 shorts, I'm glad we still got it. But don't forget, the original goal of Fantasia was to have older shorts mixed in with new ones. But they only have one new short, and it's Sorcerer's Apprentice. And the only reason Sorcerer's Apprentice doesn't really stick out that much is because every other short is in widescreen and Sorcerer's Apprentice is in 4:3. But it's a minor thing that audiences, casual audiences anyways, wouldn't even give two shits over. And plus, if you want to make a movie an hour and 30 minutes, there are so many shorts that you could pick that would still fit with the new shorts that you created, like the Nutcracker Suite, like Toccata and Fugue in D minor, because there aren't even that many abstract shorts. The first one is this Beethoven piece where there are butterflies being chased by bats, and it was a nice short, but it's the only abstract one that we get. So I felt like adding older ones that were abstract might have given it a nice balance and have more of an even quality that some people were complaining about. But I gotta be completely honest, I actually like Fantasia 2000 more than the original, and I think as I'm describing these stories in more detail, it's just that these stories feel a lot more fleshed out. There are characters that are much more fleshed out. Characters I can actually remember their faces, remember their arcs. It is a big step forward from having it just be abstract images and then stories to an entire feature where it's nothing but straightforward stories, but it also helps that the drawing styles for each short make them all stand out, make them feel more unique. The shorts in the original were all fantastic and well done, but they all did kind of look the same. They all had the same colors, they had the same lines, and because this movie features 2D and 3D, there's a little bit more variety in the presentation too. And, people are going to point out that the original was more groundbreaking, which is why it's better, and if you feel that way, I completely understand. Fantasia 2000 is not groundbreaking by any means. It's just an entertaining Disney movie. And for that reason, I'm going to give Fantasia 2000 a 4 out of 5. Guys, thanks as always for watching. If you have seen Fantasia 2000, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. I'm getting down to my last few 2D hand-drawn Disney films, so be sure to stay tuned for more reviews, and be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.